Hello, and welcome to the project. In this one, we're going to be incorporating the NASA API to get random astronomy pictures of the day. You can see that the results are formatted into cards with an image, title, add to favorites, description, date, and copyright information. And we have several results here, 10 to be exact. If we click on an image, we can see that we can view the full resolution version of that image in a new tab. If we close that, we also have the ability to add images to our favorites page. This is accomplished using local storage. If we click here, we see that we have a little pop-up that notifies us that we've added that to favorites. We can add another one here. If we click it again, however, nothing happens because it's already added to our favorites object. We can then navigate to our favorites page and see the three images that we saved here. We also have the option to remove a favorite, and the page reloads from the top of the page. We have the option then to go back to our main page. You can see we had our loading animation there briefly. We can also scroll down the page and press load more, and it will scroll back up to the top of the page with 10 fresh images. These images are also lazy loaded in order to improve performance. It will only load an image when it comes close to being scrolled to. Very cool. Lastly, this project is also mobile responsive. If we open up our dev tools, we can see that it looks great in this view as well. All right, so that's it for the project. There's a lot of functionality packed into this one. Let's get started. Alrighty, so before we get to the project itself, we're going to start with creating a custom loading animation using Loaf. I will provide a link to this within the course. This is going to be a program that you're going to need to download. You can download it for Mac or for Windows. You can see here what it looks like. This will allow us to create custom loading animations and be able to change the color, the size, and the speed. The great thing about this is that it is high performance as it's using animated SVGs. The free version has 74 options, which should also be enough for most people's needs. We're going to start by downloading the application, in my case, on Mac. Once the download is complete, we'll click on the setup file, drag it over to our applications. The process is, of course, slightly different on Windows. We can close this now and use Command Spacebar to track down our Loaf application, and we want to launch it. Okay, so we're finally in the application. We can see that we start out with a 3D printing animation here. I want something specific to our NASA API, so I'm going to search rocket, and I can see that there are 3 results. We have access to the first one. It has a green dot. That means it's free. So that's the one we're going to go with, Rocket 1. I do want to change this up a little bit. I'm going to leave the size as it is, but I think that the stroke could be a little bit more defined. So we doubled that to 4 pixels. The duration looks good to me, but if you wanted to slow it down, you could. You see that's a lot slower. We'll set that back to 0.2 like it was. I also want to change the stroke color. I want it to be a nice kind of bright red, so something like that. You can, of course, make any animation you want to, but for the purposes of this project, that is exactly what I'm looking for. The last thing we want to do is save our SVG so that it can be used in our project. I'm going to change the name just to simplify it to just be rocket.svg, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. Okay, so we're done now with our Loaf application. it's time to get started and incorporate it into our project. There will be a special template file for this project within the course. You'll need to download it and unzip it, and then you'll be at where I'm at now. I'm going to then rename just to show that I'm working on it. Delete the template part of the file name. Then we're going to copy our rocket.svg file into our folder and open it in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we can see we have our 3 files open here. There is some CSS provided already, and we have our index.html here. We can see that we have our title already in place, and our favicon is actually pointed this time to the NASA website so that we have the NASA favicon. Let's go ahead and launch the project. Alrighty, so we can see that we have the title here and our NASA favicon. Very cool. Let's now add our loader to the project. First, in our HTML, we'll need to add it in. We'll start with commenting out a title for our loader. Then we'll create a div. We can do this with a shortcut of just typing in the class that we're going to assign to the div. So I can type period loader is going to be the name of the class, and I can press enter, and you can see it creates a div with the class loader. Inside of that, we're going to use an image element for our SVG. So I will type img and press enter. That also autocompletes for us. The source will be our rocket.svg. You see, as soon as I started typing, it automatically populated the name because it's in the same folder as our index.html file. We will also add an alt description. We can now save this and check it out. Awesome, we have our loading animation in our project. Next, though, we want our loader div to act as an overlay that will cover everything up, so the entire screen width and height, with the loader image centered in the very middle. We'll need to add some styling in order to accomplish this. Back in our style CSS, again, you can see we already have some CSS here. Specifically, our background is already the color of white smoke, which is just a subtle off-white color. We will add in our loading CSS right here. We're going to give it the same background color as our body. So background is going to be white smoke. We want the height of this div to be 100 viewport height, so the entire height of the screen, no matter what it is. And same for width, we want 100 viewport width, so 100% of the width of the screen. Then we're going to use display flex, justify content center, and align items center in order to have our image be in the center of our page. Let's save that and check it out. All right, perfect. So it's centered right there in the middle of the page. All we need to do now is show and hide it. Normally, I would use a hidden attribute in the HTML, something like this. We can save that and check, but you can see that this doesn't work. This is because we are using display flex, and we'll need to explicitly change that display value to be none. So we'll need to have a hidden CSS class instead. We can remove this hidden, adding in our hidden class here. Then in our CSS, we'll go to the very bottom, right above our media query, to add our hidden class here, just in case we use it on any other elements. This will just be display none. So because it's at the end, it will override the display flex on our loader div. So let's save both of these and check it out now. Perfect. So our loader is now hidden. Later in the JavaScript, we will target that element and add or remove that hidden CSS class as needed. But for now, that's it for incorporating an animated loader. In the next one, we're going to start building out our UI. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now. Welcome back. The goal of this video will be to build our navigation UI. We don't have different pages, but it will appear that way to the user. We ultimately want two separate navigation menus based on whether the user is on the main results page or on the favorites page. We also want this navigation to be fixed at the top as well as being the top layer so that it is always accessible as the user scrolls through the images. Let's start in the HTML. We will start out with a container div that is going to hold everything, our navigation and our images container, which we will make later on. We want this to be outside of our loader div. So below that, we'll comment out a title for our container. Then we'll create a div with the class container using our abbreviation. So period container, press enter to create the div. Inside of this, we're going to comment out a title for our navigation. We're going to create a navigation container div now. So period navigation dash container, press enter. Inside of this, we are going to use a span for the background of our navigation. This is going to allow us to scroll through without seeing the pictures beneath the text layer of our navigation. I'll explain this more when we get to it. So to create this span, we'll type out span.background to create a span with the class background. We'll just leave it like that. Below this, we'll comment out a title for our first type of navigation, which will be our results nav. Then we're going to create another span in this. The reason I'm using spans and not divs is because spans don't take up any space. And instead of using buttons for our navigation, we're going to be using H3 elements, which are text elements, so they can be inside of a span. This span is going to have the class of navigation-items. We're also going to give it an ID. So we can do hashtag at the end of this, results, capital N, nav, so results nav, and then press enter. And you can see I have a span with the class and ID. Next, inside of this, we'll start with our H3s. So our first one here, H3, we want to give it a class of clickable. Press enter. This is going to be for our favorites. Then we want an H3 that's just going to have a bullet point and some spacing. So the way that we can get spacing to happen, this is essentially adding padding in within our HTML, is to use something called non-breakable space. So if I were to just put in space, space, space in my HTML, when it's presented on the page, it actually is going to remove all of those spaces. In order to avoid that, we can actually use this and NBSP. You can see that it is filling this out for me. And then there's a semicolon there at the end. You can see now that it has turned blue. So this is going to allow us to have a space that does not get removed when the page is created. We want to copy this a couple times. So I'm going to use 6 in total. And in the middle, I want to add a bullet point that is going to separate my favorites from my other link, which I'll just create this first. By copying that, is going to say load more. In order to get this bullet point, I can actually go back to my browser and I'm just going to Google bullet point symbol. You can see that we have this symbol here. I can highlight it and copy it and jump back and paste it in there, and we have a bullet point in there. Very cool. Let's continue on. Outside of our results nav, we also want a favorites nav. So this will show up when we're on our favorites page. Similarly, we're going to have another span with the same navigation-items class and hashtag favorites capital N nav to show that it is different. Then we'll have the same h3.clickable, and this text will say load more NASA images. For now, I'm going to hide this favorites navigation. That's how it will be when the page first loads, by simply adding the hidden class that we have here as well. We need to do this because our navigation items is also using display flex, just like our loader was. So we can save this and jump over to our CSS. If we scroll back up, we can see that we have some navigation styling here already. As I said, we wanted our main navigation container to be fixed position. We're providing a top of 0 so that it is fixed to the top. Our navigation items, which are on both our favorites nav and results nav, is using display flex, as I said. That's why we need to use the hidden class again. We can see here that we have the style for our background span. It's the same color as our body, also fixed position, this time anchored to the right side so that our width 100% starts from the right corner and goes to the left corner. We have a height of 60 pixels, just to make sure that we're covering enough space to allow our navigation text to have some padding on the top and bottom. All right. So that's what we have so far. Let's see how that all looks. Okay, so we can't see anything here, but if we inspect the page, we can see that our loader is hidden. That's good. We can see that we have a background here. So it's there, and we can see that our navigation items are there as well. So the problem is that our background is on top. If we were to get rid of this, we can see that we do in fact have our navigation items right there. They were just beneath our background span. So we can actually fix this by adding a z-index value. This is responsible for how the layers are stacked on the page. By default, every element has a z-index value of 1. In this case, we want the background to be below the nav items, so we're going to give this a z-index value of -1. That also reminds me that our loader needs to have its own z-index value that is above everything else, and we also want it to be position fixed so that no matter where we are on the page, we're going to see the loader when it pops up. So I'm going to add position fixed and a z-index value of 10. We will check this out a little bit later. For now, let's save our CSS file and check out our navigation. Okay, so we can see now that that is working correctly. If we refresh the page, we can see that we have our background span here still, but it is now below our navigation items. Awesome. Next, we want to make these feel more clickable and less like text, because right now they just look like text to me. So we're going to use the clickable class to accomplish this. Let's jump back to our CSS. Right below our background CSS class, we're going to add values to our clickable class. We will start with giving it a color. I'm going to choose Dodger Blue, but you can choose whatever color you would like. We're also going to give it a cursor pointer. You can see it's highlighted here. If I press Tab and Tab again, it automatically adds that for me. This will give us the hand icon that you would normally see on a button as we hover over our clickable H3 element. Lastly, we're going to add in a user select none. You can see it already came up here again as well. I'll just press enter and right arrow. So this will disable the user from being able to select it like they would with normal text. Let's save that and check it out. Okay, so we can see we can no longer select the text, and when we hover over, our cursor changes. But I think we can make it a little more obvious that this is something that can be clicked by changing the color when the user hovers over. We'll jump back to the code to take care of that. We will use clickable and then colon to add the hover pseudo class. This will change the styling when this element is hovered over. I personally am just going to change the color, but you could actually change any property you wanted to. I'm going to paste this in here and then drag my mouse over the color, and I'm just going to use the color picker within Visual Studio to make it just a little bit darker. You can see that we have our original color there and our new color there. I think it can be a little, I think that's good there. Okay, cool. So let's save that now and check it out. Okay, so now when I hover over, we can see that the color changes. So it's very obvious, I think, that it's something that can be clicked on. Awesome. One last thing, we just want to check that our other navigation is looking good as well. So in our Explorer here, we can remove this class of hidden, and we can add that class back to our other one here. And we can see now that we have our other navigation, which is following in the same styling as our previous one. Awesome. That looks great. If we refresh the page, you see it goes back to normal. So we've finished with our navigation UI. In the next one, we're going to tackle the rest of our UI. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now. So, the goal of this video is to finish the UI, including our cards as well as our save confirmation message that we will trigger. In the HTML, we'll start with the easier one first. We're going to add a div outside of our container div because it will be fixed position. We'll comment out a title, save, confirmation. You can scroll down a bit. We'll start with adding a div, so dot with the class save-confirmed, press enter, and then inside of that, we're simply going to have an h1, press enter to create that element, and then inside, we'll type added in all caps, plus an exclamation mark. We can save that, and if we jump over to the CSS and scroll down, we can see that we already have our styling in place here. It's going to be fixed position towards the bottom right. There's some box shadow and border radius to make it look modern, and a white background which will stand out compared to the background color white smoke that we have on everything else. So let's check that out. Okay, that's looking good. You can see that it stands out, the white compared to the white smoke. We have our rounded corners and our border radius. I think that's looking pretty awesome. Now, let's get to the much bigger task of creating our main cards here. We'll go back to our HTML, and right at the bottom of our container, outside of our navigation container div, we're going to comment out another title. This is going to be for our images container. Scroll down a bit. Inside of this, we're going to create a div with the class of images-container. So period images-container, press enter. That'll create the div for us. And we can scroll down here. Based on the introduction video, you should have a good idea of the elements that we want to have in our card. So to start out with, we're going to create a div for an individual card. Eventually, all of this is going to be done in JavaScript, but we're going to do it all in HTML just to figure out our CSS. First thing, we're going to create a div to wrap our individual card. So dot card to give a div with the class card. Inside of this, the first thing is going to be our image, but we want to wrap that image in an anchor tag so that the user can click on that and go to the full resolution version of the image. So we will type A, press enter. We'll leave the href blank for now because, again, we'll be building that within JavaScript. We do want it to have a title to show that it can be clicked on, and this will say View Full Image. And we also want to add a target of _blank so that it opens in a new tab. We'll press Enter here, and inside of our anchor tag is where we're going to create our image. So we'll have img. We're going to give this a class, so dot card-image-top. Press Enter. We'll leave the source blank for now. The alt will be NASA picture of the day. That's going to be important because we actually won't have an image at all, so all we'll see is our alt tag for now. We'll deal with that afterwards. Next, we're going to create a div for the card-body. So this is going to wrap everything else and give it some padding. First, we're going to have our card title. We're going to use an h5.card-title. This is going to be the title of image. Below that, we're going to have a p element with the class of clickable. Press Enter. This is going to be our add to favorites link that we can click on. Below that, we're going to have another p element with the class this time of card-text. For now, we can add lorem text just to fill this out. So lorem, and then press Tab, will give you some placeholder text. I'm going to now use Alt-Z to word wrap it so that we can see everything. I can also add another round of lorem just by typing lorem and pressing Tab again, just to make it a little bit longer, like it will be from our API. We'll press Enter here to have some spacing. And below this p element, we're going to have our footer at the bottom. This is going to be for our date and our copyright info. We can actually use an element called small in order to have a automatically smaller text element. We'll also give this a class of text-muted in order to change the font color. Inside of this, we're going to use an element called strong. This is kind of a way in HTML to specify that something should be bold. So we'll do that for the date. Then below that, we'll just have a span that will include our copyright info. Okay, so we can save that and check it out. All right, so I'd say that is a pretty good start. Our text is looking good. If we go back actually quickly into our CSS, we can see that we have set a font size of 1 rem, and we've also modified the line height. And I've just added a default font of Verdana that's included on this machine. Let's jump back. Okay, other than that, we can see as we hover over that our box shadow actually gets bigger. You can see at the bottom here. So that's a nice little touch. We have our rounded corners. The box shadow makes it look like it's floating on the page. Our title looks good. If we hover over this, it gets darker, just like our links up here. It's the same class. The only thing that is not working is we don't have an image here. So let's take care of that next. I'll provide this link within the course. This is essentially just returning a value from the NASA API without having to actually set it up. And in this case, I'm going to copy the high def version of the image. So this is the HD URL value. I'm going to copy that, and we can close this tab for now, jump back to the project, and paste it in the image source. We can save that now and check it out. Okay, so we can see that image is huge, and it definitely broke our layout here. So let's try to fix that. If we jump back to our code, into our style CSS, we can see that we already had a bunch of the styling for our images container and our card and everything else as well. But we'll need to actually style our images container and give it a specific pixel value for its width. So we only want this to be 800 pixels wide. We don't want it to be any wider than that. We will also need to style the image itself. So if we go down below here, we want to style our card img-top specifically with a width of 100%. So that means it's going to fill the container that it's in. And because we have set the width of the parent container, it will fill that container 100%. We're also going to give it a height of auto as well. So let's save that and check it out. Okay, so that's looking a whole lot better. It is fitting very nicely there. But you can see that we've lost our rounded corners because of our image. That means we're actually going to have to round the corners on the image itself. We can accomplish this by adding in to our card image top class a border dash radius value. This time we only want the top left and top right to have a border radius. So we can do that by typing out 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 0, and 0. So this is for the top left, the top right, the bottom left, and the bottom right. We want those to still not be rounded because they're in the middle of the card. So we can save that and check it out. All right, perfect. So these corners are rounded here, and you can see that these ones are not at the bottom. Excellent. Okay, so let's check out the mobile view next. We'll right-click, inspect, open our mobile view here. Okay, so we can see that that is not looking too good either. This is because our image's container has a width of 800 pixels, but you can see that the width of this screen is only 411. So we'll need to fix that in our mobile responsive media query. At the very bottom, you can see that I've already added a media query here for you in order to save some time. Below our body media query, we're going to target our .images-container, and we're going to change the width from that hard pixel value of 800 pixels to be 100%. You can see that the max width here is 800 pixels because any screen less than 800 pixels, our image container would not fit. So that is why we've set that as the breaking point instead of the traditional 600 pixels. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. All right, so that's looking way better. Everything is fitting in the page now. We even have a 10 pixel margin on the left and right. That is included in our card CSS. Awesome. One thing I think we could fix though here at the bottom, our confirmation message is a little too far out into the page. I want it to be balanced in the bottom and right in this instance. So we can jump back and change that. If we scroll up a little bit, we can see our save confirm styling here. It has a bottom of 25 pixels and a right of 50 pixels. We want the right now to also match the bottom and be 25 pixels. So below this, we can actually delete these lines here. And at the very bottom, we'll add in our save-confirmed, scroll down a little bit, and we'll just change the right value to be 25 pixels instead. So let's save that, check it out. Okay, perfect. So we can see now that this is looking a lot more balanced. Excellent. The one other thing you might have noticed is the text. So the text on desktop is left aligned, which looks fine, but to me, this looks a little bit off on a mobile view. Most people would center the text on mobile, and you can do that if you want to, but I actually think that justified text looks a little bit better. So if we jump back, we can see that we've also modified the line height to be smaller and the font size to be 10% smaller as well. And in here, we'll use text-align justify as our value. Let's save that, check it out. Okay, so I personally like the look of that. It makes it so that the text stretches to the left and right and has some spaces in the middle instead of having the spaces at the ends of the line. All right, so I would say that that's pretty much it for our UI. It's looking great on both mobile and desktop views. We can actually hide our save confirmation bubble now that we are finished styling it. So back in the HTML, we will just add the hidden attribute to this element, save that, check it out. Okay, perfect. We can also confirm now that as we scroll, our navigation remains fixed at the top and on the top layer. All right, excellent. That's it for our UI. In the next one, we're going to start on our functionality, beginning with an introduction to the NASA API. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now. Alrighty, welcome back. In this video, we're going to familiarize ourselves with the NASA API and set up a fetch request to pull data from that API. The first thing we're going to do is jump over to the NASA API website. I will provide a link to this within the course. If we scroll down, we can see that the first thing they're suggesting is to sign up for an API key, which you can do if you want to, but in this case, it's actually not necessary. If we scroll down, we can see that we do not need to authenticate in order to use the NASA data. The difference is, if you sign up for an API key, you're going to have an hourly limit of 1,000 requests per hour. But you also have the option of using demo_key as the API key instead, which has an hourly limit of 30 requests per IP address per hour, and a daily limit of 50 requests per IP address per day. For our purposes, that is good enough for development, and we can avoid signing up and sharing a confidential API key on GitHub. So that's what I'm going to stick with in this project. If we go down to the bottom, we can see that there are a number of different APIs to choose from. We have such things as Mars rover photos, which you can see there's lots of different types of photos we can have from the Mars rover. And there's a lot of other options here as well. I would say another alternative to this project would be to do something with Mars rover photos, which would be very cool. If you end up doing a different project with a different NASA API, definitely share it within the course, and I'll share it with everyone else as well. For our purposes, we're going to focus on the APOD API, which is Astronomy Picture of the Day. If we click on this, we can see that this is one of the most popular websites at NASA, and I believe it's been around since the late 1990s. If we click on it, we can actually go to their website for Picture of the Day. You can see it actually has the picture we were using as our sample picture here in our project. And we can see that the styling is not amazing. I think that our styling is a little bit better on our page, but we're going to have a similar functionality, except that we're also going to have multiple pictures per page that we can scroll through instead of having just one per page like they have on the official site. Okay, so let's jump back and explore the APOD API in a little bit more detail. You can see we have an example image here. It shows us the HTTP request that can be made. So it's a GET request. In our case, we're going to use a fetch method to call this API URL. You can see in the example query that we will need to pass in a query parameter of the API key. In our case, we're just going to use the demo key. And I also happen to know that we can pass in a query parameter of count in order to return a certain number of items. So let's take care of that. We can actually copy this example query here and jump back to our code and get it all set up. We're done with this page for now. We can close that, jump back, and in our script.js file, we'll have a few empty lines here that we'll use later. We'll comment out a title for the NASA API. We're going to have a constant API URL, capital U, equals, and we're going to make this a template string because we're going to paste in variables for our API key and our count numbers so that they can be changed easily. So we'll paste that in there. And above this, we'll create two other constants. First, one for our API key equals, and this is going to be a string, demo, capital letters, underscore key. And then we'll have a semicolon there. As I said, if you sign up for your own, it will remove the limits, our hourly limit, and you can just paste it in here. And we're going to change this to be a template string with $, curly brackets. You can see that turns blue. Now we're going to pass in the value of our API key constant. And above that, we are going to have a constant count, which is going to be equal to 10. You can change this number if you want to have more or less. It's up to you. I'm going to add this in with an and sign, and then count equals $, curly brackets, and then we're going to pass in our count constant there as well, and then a semicolon at the end. Okay, so that's all set up. We can actually use word wrap so we can see everything. We'll hit Alt-Z there. Below this, we're going to create an array that we're going to pass in what we're fetching from the API. We're going to use a let statement because we will modify this later on. Results array, capital A, is going to be the name of our array. And we're going to initialize an empty array by typing equals and then square brackets, and then a semicolon at the end. Below that, we're going to set up an asynchronous fetch request. This is something that I've done in a few other projects, and it's going to follow that same pattern. First, we're going to comment out a title, get 10 images from NASA API. And because we want this to be asynchronous, we are going to prepend async before we write out function. Then we're going to name the function get NASA pictures, capital N, capital P, brackets, curly brackets, and then inside of this, we're going to use the try-catch statement that we were using previously. So try, curly brackets, we're going to put our fetch request in there, but we're also going to have a catch statement, bracket error, curly brackets, and then we're going to comment out a title, catch error here. So what this means is it's going to try to run something, in this case, our fetch request, and we're going to put all of that code in there. But if it fails, it will run this catch function, and it will pass in the parameter of the error that is getting thrown. You could choose to console log this or log it so that the user could see it in its own element, but we're not going to worry about that because I know that this is going to work properly. Okay, so we want to have a constant of response. This is going to await the results of the fetch request, bracket, and we're going to pass in the API URL as the constant for that fetch request. Next, we're going to populate the results array and await that response in JSON format. So response.json, this is going to convert this value into JSON, and then once that's done, it's going to pass it to our results array. Lastly, we can just console.log our results array to make sure that we're actually getting the data. The very last thing we'll need to do is make sure that we're calling this function as the page is loading. So down at the very bottom, we'll comment out another title on load, and we'll just type in our function, get NASA pictures, bracket, and then semicolon there at the end. So we can save that now and check it out. We're going to need to open up our console, and we can refresh the page now. Okay, and after a second, we see that we have 10 objects here in an array. If we expand this, awesome. We are getting data from the NASA API. That was very quick and very easy. Excellent. If we expand one of the objects, we can see the kind of data that's being returned. We can see that we have the date, which we're going to return at the bottom here. We have the explanation. If we hover over it, we can see the whole explanation. That's going to go here. We have the HD URL. That's going to be our anchor tag, which we can click to go to the high resolution version of the image. We have the title that's going to go here, and we have the URL, which is going to be the source of the image. You can see that this particular one does not have any copyright info. So some objects will have that value and some will not. If we click on this one here, we can see that we do in fact have a copyright value, so that would go right there. Awesome. So we are getting our data. That is the first step to dynamically populating our cards here. In the next one, we're going to take a look at actually using this data to dynamically build out all of our cards. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now. Alrighty, so the goal of this video is going to be to switch from creating our card in HTML to creating it all within our JavaScript so that we can create as many as we have results. Okay, so jumping back to the code, the first thing we're going to do in our index.html is delete our card. We can actually use this arrow here to minimize everything. And then we can highlight these lines and just delete them and delete that so that it's all on one line now. We can save that. Then we're going to go over to our script.js, and we're going to provide a constant for everything that we need to target in our HTML. So the first thing we're going to add is a constant for our results nav. This will be document.getElementById, bracket, single quotes, and then results nav. We can actually copy this. We'll do the same thing for our favorites nav, and we can use multi-select to replace both of these at the same time. This is Command D on Mac, Control D on Windows. You can see they're both highlighted. I'm going to press the left cursor and then delete and type out favorites nav. You can see it changed both at once. Next, we want to have a constant for our images container. This is going to be the parent that is going to hold all the cards we're creating in our JavaScript. For this one, we're going to use a query selector to select the class images-container. So single quotes dot images-container. Next, we want to target our save confirm. So constant save confirmed, capital C, equals document.querySelector, brackets, single quotes. Again, we're going to target the class. So dot save dash confirmed. Then below that, the last one will be our loader, which is going to be equal to document.querySelector, bracket, single quotes, and then dot loader to target the element with the loader class. Next, we're going to need to create another function to actually update our DOM. We're going to create that above our get NASA pictures function, and it's going to be called update DOM, D-O-M, capital. Then we'll need to actually call this. Instead of just console logging the results array, we're going to call the function in our get NASA pictures function. So we'll have update DOM at the bottom of our try statement here. Now in our update DOM function, we're ready to start creating our card. So there is more than one way that we can create HTML elements in our JavaScript. Some people might use inner HTML, but this is not the most secure way of working because using inner HTML, someone can pass in JavaScript that will become executed. So what we want to do is use our results array, loop through each item in the array, and then have a constant for each element that we want to create. Then we will add CSS classes to the constants as necessary. We will add attributes as necessary, and we will add text content as necessary. And then in the end, we will append these elements into our images container element. So let's get started with that process. First, we're going to use our results array, and then we're going to call the forEach method on the array. This allows us to call a function for each item in the array. We'll add another set of brackets and then type out result to set the local variable that will represent each item within the array. This can be anything you want, but I'm just going to choose to name it result. After that, we'll use equal sign and arrow to create an arrow function, then curly brackets, and then press enter, and make sure that we add a semicolon there at the end. So we have our forEach set up here. Now we need to actually do something with each individual result. We'll start by creating the card element, as this is the parent. We'll comment out a title for this. This is the card container, and we're going to have a constant card equals document.create element, bracket, single quotes, and we want to create a div element specifically. Semicolon at the end here. Next, we want to add a class, a CSS class to this card. So we'll just type card.ClassList.add, and then brackets, single quotes, and then card. We're adding the card class. Notice that we don't need to add the period in this case because it's already expecting a class. Next, we will go down and create every other element in order. The next will be the link that is going to wrap our image. So we'll comment out a title for the link. Constant link equals document.createElement, bracket, single quotes, and this is just going to be an anchor element, so we're just going to have the letter A in there. The link, then we want to provide the attributes for this link element. We can just type link.href, so href, equals, and now we can start passing in our dynamic data. So we want this to be our result.hdurl, semicolon. So this is going to allow our link to go to the HD URL from the object we're returning from the NASA API. Next, we'll have link.title. So this is setting another attribute that we had within our HTML. Single quotes, this is going to be view full image. So when we hover over the image, we will see this title pop up. Semicolon there. Then link.target equals single quotes underscore blank. This will allow the link to open in a new tab. Next, we're going to create the image. If we scroll down here, we'll have a constant for image equals document.createElement, and then in brackets, single quote img to create an image element. This image will need a source, so we'll target that image.source to set that attribute, equals result.url. So we just want the regular URL to load the regular size image, because that will load faster. Next, we want to have our alt attribute populated, so image.alt equals single quotes, and this is just going to be NASA picture of the day. So this will pop up if the image happens to not load, which does happen sometimes. Semicolon there. Next, we want these images to lazy load so that as we scroll through, they are loaded and they're not all loaded at once. So this will increase our performance. So we'll do image.loading equals single quotes and then lazy. And then the last thing is we want to add the class of card image top. So we will go image.ClassList.add brackets, single quotes, card dash img dash top, and then semicolon at the end there. So I think you can kind of see the pattern that I'm working with here. I would challenge you to pause the video and see if you can figure out the rest of what I'm going to do in creating the constants for the elements. Okay, welcome back. I will now show you the rest of the process. So we can keep scrolling down here. Next, we're going to comment out a title for the card body. So this is the div card body that is going to contain our title and our text and our footer and everything else. We'll create a constant for this. I'm going to call it card body, capital B on body, document, create element, bracket, single quotes. This one's going to be a div as well. And then the only thing we need to do with card body is to use classlist.add to add the card-body class. Next, we're going to add in the card title. Constant will be card title, capital T, equals document, create element. This time it's going to be an H5, semicolon there, and then card title dot classlist dot add. We want to add the card dash title class to that. Then we want to have the actual text for the title. So we're going to go card title dot text content equals result dot title. So this will dynamically populate with the title from our object. Below that, we'll have our save text. We'll comment out a title for that. Then constant save text, capital T, equals document dot create element, bracket, single quotes. We want this to be a paragraph element, so we'll just have P there for that. Next, we're going to add the class of clickable, so save text dot classlist dot add, bracket, single quote, clickable, just like our navigation. And then save text dot text content is going to be equal to a string, single quotes, add to favorites, semicolon there. Next, our card text itself. So this is our explanation. Constant card text equals document dot create element, bracket, single quote, P. Card text, the only thing we need to add is the text itself. So card text dot text content is going to be equal to result dot explanation, semicolon there. We're getting closer to the end, but you can see that this is a very involved process, doing it the secure and performant way. We have our footer container. This is going to be constant footer equals document dot create element, bracket, single quotes. This is going to be our small element that we had before. The footer dot classlist dot add, we're going to add the text dash muted CSS class. And then the actual footer content. First, we're going to have the date. So constant date equals document dot create element. We're going to use our strong element. So remember that that makes everything inside of it bold. And then we want to have just the text content there be changed. This is going to be result.date. Next, we're going to have the copyright. This is going to be const copyright equals document.create element, bracket, single quotes. This is going to be a span element. And again, this is going to be the text content that we're going to change. This time, we're actually going to use a template string because we want to add in a space between the date and the copyright. To do that, we can use backticks, so the button below our escape key. We're just going to add a space there, then $, curly brackets, and then we're going to pass in result.copyright, semicolon at the end, and we're finally finished creating our elements. That took a little while. Now we need to append them all together in the right order. So we'll comment out a title for that. We're going to append. And I like to usually go bottom to top. So the first thing is that we want the date and copyright to be inside of our footer. So we will do that with footer.append. So you'll notice there is append and append child. I'm going to use both of them, but keep in mind that append child only works with one object, whereas append, you can add multiple objects in the same line. So we're going to be using append in this case, and we're going to pass them in the right order. So we want the date first, comma, copyright. So we're passing in the date constant and then the copyright constant. Then we can have a semicolon there. Next, we have our card body. So if we scroll up, this is the parent of our title, our save text, our card text, and our footer itself. So we will do card body dot append. And again, we'll do this in order. First, we want the card title, and then we want the card text, then we want the save text, and then we want the footer. Below that, we want to wrap the image inside of our anchor element. So we will do link.append child. We can do it this time because we're only putting one item in, and we're going to append the image constant. And then lastly, we have the card at the top, which is going to contain all of these different constants. So we're going to do card.append, and we're going to pass in first our link, because that's at the very top. That is our link in our image. And then we're going to pass in the card body constant that we've appended all of this other stuff to. Lastly, let's just console log our card to see what the result of all of this is. Let's save that and check it out. Okay, so you see that we have nothing on our page now because we deleted our placeholder in our HTML. If we right-click and inspect and look inside the console, we can see that we have our array of 10 objects, and you can see that we have our 10 items here as well. If we expand this, we can see that we have something that looks a lot like what we had in our HTML. So we have our div, we have our anchor element wrapped in our image element. You can see that we have two different links here. This is 2400 pixel resolution. This is 900 resolution. So this is clicking on the HD image. This is the image that's going to populate. If we expand this, we have our card body that has our title. It has our main text. And it has our add to favorites actually. So we kind of messed up the order here. We want the add to favorites text to actually be above our explanation instead of below our explanation like it currently is. So we can go ahead and change the order of that. But if we see down here, our footer is fine. We have the date and then we have the copyright. That's undefined. That's not good, but we'll get back to that in a moment. Okay, so let's jump back to the code and let's change the order of this. So we actually want the card text to be over here. So the order that you are adding these does matter, so keep that in mind. And we can remove our console now and actually append to our images container. So we'll type out images container dot append child. Again, it's only one individual child, and this is our card that we're going to append. So that's why you can see now why I'm going bottom to top. So smallest to biggest. Let's save that now and check it out. Okay, that's awesome. We can see that we have dynamically populated our cards. That is so cool. We have our images, we have our title, we have our add to favorites, we have our explanation, we have our date, and you can see the problem that we just saw is that when there is no copyright information, it just shows up as undefined. When there is some, it does show it, so that's fine, but we want to set a conditional when it's undefined to just have a blank space instead of saying undefined. So we can go back to our code and take care of that. So in our copyright section here, what we can do to fix that is we're going to have a new constant called copyright result. And this is going to be a ternary operator. So this is another way of writing an if statement in a shorter way. So if result.copyright is equal to 3 equal signs, undefined, then question mark, we want copyright result, this constant here, to be equal to an empty string. But if it's not defined, we'll have a colon there. We want it to be the result copyright value, semicolon. So again, just to go over how this ternary statement works, we're creating a new constant called copyright result. If result.copyright is equal to undefined, then we will have an empty string. If not, we will use the result.copyright data to populate this constant. The next thing we're going to need to change is we're going to copy this copyright constant, and that is going to replace the result.copyright in our template string. So let's save that now and check it out. Okay, so if we scroll back up to the top and we go through, we can see that instead of being undefined, it is just blank. Perfect. That one's blank too. And you can see this one that has a value, we can still see the value. All right, that is excellent. We have solved the problem. I know this has been a very long video, but we've taken a really big step of actually populating our DOM with the dynamic data in our cards. In the next one, we'll use local storage to start saving our favorites. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now.
Alrighty, welcome back. Now that we have the big task accomplished of actually populating our UI with the data from our NASA API, the next step in this video is we want to use local storage to save the favorites into a favorites object, which will eventually be used to populate our favorites page. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is, at the top, we're going to create a global favorites object. We're creating this up at the top because we're going to be using it in more than one function. In order to create an object, instead of using the square brackets to create our array, we're going to use curly brackets to initiate our empty object. The reason that we're using an object and not an array is that it will be easier to delete favorite items. Instead of having to loop through an entire array, we're going to be able to delete an item from the object using its key value. For now, though, let's focus on setting up our save favorite functionality. If we jump back, we can see that we have this add to favorites item. This is our save text constant. And you can see currently that it does not do anything. So we'll need to change that. If we jump back to the code and scroll down, we can see our save text constant here. We are adding a CSS class and we're adding the text add to favorites. Now we're going to need to actually add a save favorite function that will work when this element is clicked. So to do that, we can do something similar to what we were doing before in setting an attribute. So we'll do save text on click equals, and this time we're going to need another template string. So the backtick button below the escape key. We're going to pass in the name of the function, save favorite, and then in brackets, we're going to need to pass in a dynamic piece of data that is going to be different for each item in order for it to be targeted to be saved and later deleted. So to do that, we're going to have single quotes, single quote, and in those single quotes, we're going to use our $ curly bracket to pass in a dynamic value that will be converted into a string. So we want to use result.url because we know that this value will always be unique. We'll add a semicolon here at the end, and then we'll need to create the function down below. So right at the bottom here, comment out a title, add result to favorites, and create our function, save favorite, and this is going to have the parameter. We're going to call it item URL. That's what we're passing from above. Let's just console log that to make sure that it's working correctly. Okay, so let's save that. Check it out. Okay, so if we click on this, nothing is happening. Okay, so there is a problem with the way we are implementing this. I would challenge you to pause the video and see if you can figure out what the issue is here. Okay, welcome back. So we can see that up above for our image, when we wanted to add a source attribute, we were just able to do image.source and then add our attribute. We can see for the onClick though, that instead of being this light blue color, it is a yellow color. And you might recognize this yellow color from all of our other methods. So that means instead of actually setting this onClick attribute, it is creating an onClick method dynamically that does not allow us to click on it later to trigger the function. So to solve this, we need to be a little bit more robust in how we are applying this. So we can cut our template string here, and instead of having an onClick, we're going to use the setAttribute method and then brackets. Inside of this, we're going to pass in the name of the attribute we want to set as a string, so single quotes, onClick, and then a comma, and then we want to set the value of that attribute, which is going to be our template string, which we can paste back in. So let's save that and check it out now. Okay, so everything's loaded here. Now if we click Add to Favorites, perfect. We have our URL from that favorite. Let's click another one just to make sure that it's different. And yes, we can see that we have two different URLs. They are unique. Awesome. So that's how we're going to target our favorites. The next thing we need to do now is be able to pull all of the data from this item using the key of its unique URL. We can accomplish this by looping through the results array and using the includes method in order to check to see if an item URL matches the item URL we're passing from our save favorite function. You can see that it checks a string to see if it includes something. So in this example, it's checking this string to see if it includes world. And if it does, it returns true. If it does not, it returns false. So we can use this in a conditional statement. Okay, so let's jump back to the code. If we scroll down to our save favorite function, we can get rid of our console log. We'll start by commenting out a title. Then we'll target our results array with a for each method. Then instead of passing result, we're just going to call it item this time. I know above we called it a result, but in this case we'll call it an item. And then we'll set up our arrow function again. And inside of this, as I said, we're going to use a conditional statement. So if the item, so we're going to loop through each item in the array, if item.url.includes bracket the item URL that we're passing as a parameter, if it includes this, it'll be true. Then we want to set the favorites object with the key of item URL. So we're going to create an object within the object that has the key of item URL, and we want that to be equal to the item, meaning that the value will be the entire set of data, and the key will be the item URL that we are passing as a parameter. Let's console log favorites just to make sure that it's working correctly. Let's save that and check it out. Okay, so if we click on Add to Favorites here, we can see that we've logged something here. So this is the console log for our favorites object. If we expand it, we see that we have the URL acting as a key. And if we expand it again, we can see that, awesome, we have the rest of our data here. That is perfect. If we minimize this and click on another one, we can see now that our favorites object now contains two objects, and they both have all of their data. Perfect. Now that we have our favorites data, we want to do more than just console log it. First, we want to throw up our save confirmation message in the bottom right. So let's jump back to the code and take care of that. Below our console here, we'll comment out a title. And we want to show the save confirmation for just 2 seconds and then have it disappear. So in order to accomplish that, we will do save confirmed. The constant that we already created, dot hidden, is going to be equal to false. We can see in our index HTML that by default it is hidden. So we're going to make this false. Then we want to hide it again after a delay. So for that, we're going to use a set timeout method. And then inside of this, we're going to have an arrow function. Curly brackets, enter, add the semicolon there. We want to have save confirmed dot hidden be equal to true again so that it's hidden. And then at the end here, we need to add a comma and then 2000 to represent the 2 seconds in milliseconds. So 2 seconds equals 2000 milliseconds. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. Okay, so we have our pop-up here, perfect, and it disappeared. Excellent. So that's working great. If we click on the same one though, we can see that we have an added pop-up here again, but we can see that we did not add another object to our favorites. So in order to fix that, we can actually append the conditional statement that we had in our save favorite function. Instead of just checking to see if the results array item includes our item URL, we also want to check if it's already existing in our favorites object. So to do that, we're going to add to our conditional. So that means we're going to set 2 separate conditions. We can do that with 2 ampersands, so and. Then our other condition is going to be if it does not, so exclamation mark, have a favorites object with the key of item URL. So again, to summarize, we don't want to run any of this code, including our save confirmation message, unless we have a match from an item in the results array that includes the item URL, and that the favorites object doesn't already have an item with the key of this item URL. So let's save that and check it out. Okay, so we can add this to favorites. You can see we have our pop-up here, but if we click the same one, we can see that nothing happens. We don't have a console log, and we don't have an added message. Perfect. That's working exactly as we want it to. The last thing that we want to accomplish in this video is to actually save our favorites object in local storage rather than just console logging it as we're doing now. In order to do that, we're going to need to use a method called JSON stringify. So the reason we need to use this is because JSON data stored in a web server can only be stored as a string. So we'll need to convert our favorites object into a string in order to save it in local storage, which essentially acts as a web server. So let's jump back to the code and take care of that. At first, we can actually modify our console to see what this would look like. So instead of just having console log favorites, we can console log json.stringify, and then in brackets, pass in favorites. So let's save that and see what it looks like. So if we click on Add to Favorites, we can see that instead of having an object that we can open and close, we have one long string that has all of our data inside of it. Okay, so that's the format we're going to need to use to save in local storage. In order to save in local storage, it's very straightforward, just one line. We'll comment out a title for it, set favorites in local storage, and we're going to use local storage dot set item, and then in brackets, the first value is going to be the name that we want to set in local storage. This will be the key value. We're going to set it to NASA favorites with a capital F, comma, then we're going to set our JSON stringify favorites as the actual value. We can add a semicolon there, and we can get rid of this console log now. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. Okay, so let's click on our Add to Favorites here. We can see that it's been added. Now, if we go over to the Application tab of our DevTools, we can see that we have local storage here. If we expand this, we can see that, yeah, we have our object in here. NASA favorites is the key, and we can see here the value. And if we expand this, we see that we have all of our data. That is amazing. If we go through and click another one, we can see that we've added the second object to our favorites object. Excellent. So that's working exactly as we want it to. The reason that we're using local storage and not just the favorites object within our code is that if we were to refresh the page and come back later, we can see that our data remains here in local storage. All right, awesome. So in the next video, we're going to tackle actually doing something with what we have saved in local storage. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now. Alrighty, welcome back. In this video, we're going to use the data that we have stored in local storage in order to populate the DOM just like we are currently with our results page. Let's jump back to the code. If we scroll back up and look at our functionality here for updating our DOM, we can see that currently it is only using the results array. So we're going to need to ultimately refactor this so that it's using the results array or the favorites object in order to build out our DOM elements. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to split out this functionality into its own function because this is already a big chunk of code. So we're going to highlight everything with our for each, and we're going to cut that. And we're going to create another function above. This one is going to be called create DOM nodes, DOM capital, and then capital N after that for nodes. And then inside of this, we can paste that functionality. Then we're going to need to call our create DOM nodes function within our update DOM function. The reason we are splitting this functionality is because we'll need to do a few more things in our update DOM function. The first of which is going to be to get the favorites object from local storage. If we jump back to the browser, we can see that we will need to use another method, JSON parse, in order to undo the previous method, JSON stringify. So, as this describes, we would use JSON format to exchange data to and from a web server. In this case, local storage is acting as our web server. When receiving data from local storage, the data is always a string. So we're going to use JSON parse
to turn it back into an object that we can then use to target each individual value in that object. Okay, so let's jump back to the code and take care of that. So at the top of our update DOM function, we're going to comment out a title here. We are going to get favorites from local storage. The first thing we want to do is actually use a conditional. If it is the user's very first time using the site, that means that they won't have any favorites. So we only want to parse the data from local storage if some data exists. So we will use a conditional if local storage dot get item. So remember, we were using set item in order to save to local storage. We're going to use get item to retrieve from local storage. We're going to use the same name that we had in the set item functionality, which is NASA favorites, right here. So make sure that these two things are the same if you decided to make them different. So if we can get something, then we want to do something with those results. We want to set our favorites object in our code to be equal to json.parse, and then we can actually copy this whole thing again. So we want to parse the item NASA favorites from a string back into an object, and then put that into our favorites object so we can then use it again in our code. So we will now console log favorites here. Let's just make sure that we have got rid of our other console log. So we'll get rid of this one here, just so that it's not confusing. Let's actually have a string here just to make sure that we know which one is which. So favorites from local storage. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. Okay, awesome. So we can see that we're logging favorites from local storage. And if we expand this, we can see it's an object format, and we have 4 objects here with all of their data. That is perfect. From here, now we need to use the create DOM nodes function to build either the results array or the favorites object. In order to do that, we're going to need to do some refactoring. If we jump back to the code, in order to do that, we're going to need to pass in a parameter into our update DOM function, as well as our create DOM nodes function that is going to specify which page we want to build. So we're going to call this parameter page, and we're going to pass that to our create DOM nodes function as well. And we're going to pass it from our first function, our get NASA pictures object. This is where we're going to set the page variable. So this is going to be normally results, but because we know that this works and we want to test our favorites DOM, we're going to switch this for now to be favorites. Then we're going to go up to the top here. Our create DOM nodes function is going to take the parameter of page. And at the very top, we're just going to console log it to make sure we are getting the right value. So let's save that now and check it out. Okay, so we can see that we're successfully passing the value of our page parameter into our create DOM nodes function. Now we have all the information that we need in order to populate the page from our 2 different sources, our results array and our favorites object. I would challenge you to pause the video here and see if you can figure out how we are going to refactor our create DOM nodes function in order to build one or the other. I'll give you a hint. You will need a conditional to change the results array constant in the for each method. Okay, so let's jump back and figure out how to do this. The first thing that you might notice is that we are using the results array and a for each on that to create our elements. We're going to need to have a new constant in here that is going to be able to be set to either results array or a favorites object. So right at the top here, we're going to create a constant called current array, capital A on array, and this is going to be equal to a ternary operator. So if the page value is equal to 3 equal signs, single quotes, results, then with our question mark here, we want current array to be equal to results array. If not, with our colon here, we then want it to be the favorites object. Then below that, we're going to modify our console log to be more specific. So we'll have single quotes here, current array, comma, and then we're going to log the page value as well as the current array value. Lastly, we want to change the results array for each to actually use our current array constant instead. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. Okay, so we can see that we are logging our current array as favorites, and you can see that it's matching our favorites from local storage, but we can see that nothing got built here. So there is a problem with this current implementation, and that is that the for each method only works on an array, but our favorites is an object. So in order to get around that, we're going to need to use the object.values method. This will allow us to return an array of a given object's own enumerable property values in the same order that it is provided, so in order. Okay, so we'll need to implement that for this to actually work. Instead of just passing in favorites in our ternary operator then, we're going to cut this and pass in object.values, bracket, and then pass in our favorites. Now we can save that and check that out. Okay, and we can see that it's working. We can also see now our console log has changed format. Instead of returning like an object from our local storage, we can see that our current array is now in array format, and we should have 4 items here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. So that's working. We're successfully populating our DOM now with our favorites object. Awesome. We can see though that it's not quite perfect. Because we're already in our favorites, we actually want to change this text to say remove favorite, and we want to also add the functionality to be able to remove a favorite from our local storage. We'll tackle that in the next video. I'll see you then. Bye for now. Alrighty. So we successfully built our favorites into our DOM here, but we need to make a change. We need to change our save text context here to be remove favorite, and we also want to add the functionality to be able to remove a favorite from local storage. Let's start with changing the text first. If we jump back to the code and we go down in our create DOM nodes functionality, down to save text, we can see that we're setting our text content to be add to favorites, and we are also setting the onClick event to be our save favorite function. We only want to do this now if our page value is equal to results, and if not, we want to do something else. So in order to accomplish this, we can actually cut this code here, and we're going to put an if statement, if page equals 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 is equal to single quotes results, then we want to do our original functionality, else if it's not results, then we can actually paste this in again. We want to change our text content to be remove favorite, and we want to change this function name. Instead of save favorite, we want to use the remove favorite function. So let's save that and check it out. Awesome. So we can see we've changed our text content from add to favorites to remove favorite. We can see that it's the same here. If we click on it, though, we can see that the remove favorite function is not defined. This is because we have not made this function yet. So let's jump back to the code and take care of that. At the bottom, below our save favorite function, we will make our remove favorite function. So we'll comment out a title, remove item from favorites. Then we'll create our function. Again, it's going to be similar to our save favorite function in that it's going to take a parameter of item URL. And also, similarly, we want to see if in our favorites object, we have an item that has the key of item URL. And if it does, then we want to delete it. So how would we accomplish that? If we jump back to the browser, we can see that we can use the delete operator in order to delete a property from an object. So we can see that we have our employee object here, and we want to delete the employee first name, which is John, and we can see then if we try to console log it, that has been removed from the object. So we want to do a similar thing with our favorites. So if we jump back, we are going to target an if statement. So if we have a favorites object with the key of item URL, so of course we're using square brackets for that again, then we want to delete that object in the favorites object that has the same key of the item URL. After that, we want to update the version of the favorites object in local storage to match this version where we have deleted the item. To do that, we can actually just copy this code from above and paste it here after our delete operator. We'll highlight this and use Shift-Tab in order to fix the spacing. Okay, that's better. And then the last thing we want to do is actually update our DOM. And that is going to be with the favorites page value. So we want to refresh the favorites page in order to show the new favorites page without the object that we just deleted. So let's save that and check it out. So we can see that there are 4 objects in our favorites array. If we try to delete one, we can see now that there are only 3 objects in our favorites array. That's great, but we can see that it didn't actually disappear on the page. If we manually refresh the page, we can see that it is gone now. But we want that to happen automatically, so as soon as we remove the favorite, it disappears from the page altogether. Let's jump back to the code and see if we can figure that out. Okay, so if we scroll back up to the top and we look at our update DOM and create DOM nodes function. So the issue is that we're always appending to our page, to our items container, but we are never actually resetting it. So we will need to do that. We can do that in our update DOM function. So to reset our images container so that it builds fresh every time the update DOM function is called, because we are calling it down here, so it should build the page fresh all over again, we need to target our images container constant, and we can use a trick, text content equals empty string, and this will remove all elements that have been appended to the container previously. So if we save that and check it out, let's try removing this first favorite here, and we can see that it magically disappeared from the page as we want it to. All right, awesome. That's perfect. So we've successfully changed our text content. We've added in our functionality in order to delete an item from our local storage favorites array, and we've also been able to refresh the entire page when we are deleting an object so that it automatically is removed from our UI. Awesome. There's a little bit of functionality left. In the next video, we're going to tackle actually changing our navigation around and being able to navigate between the two pages, as well as incorporating back our loading animation. All right, so I'll see you in that one. Bye for now. Alrighty, so the goal of this final video is going to be to navigate between our favorites and our results UI, as well as showing and hiding our loading animation as needed. The first thing we want to do is go back to loading our results instead of our favorites. So if we jump back to the code and we scroll down to our update DOM function call within our get NASA pictures function, as I said, we want this to actually be results and not favorites. Let's save that and check it out. Okay, so we can see that the current array is now set to results. We see that we have our 10 items here, and if we scroll through, we have our 10 items here as well. Perfect. So now we're done with our console for now. We can close that, and we can also remove our previous console logs here. So we can get rid of this one here and the other one at the top here, now that we know that that's working. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is be able to switch between our results and our favorites page in our navigation. So we'll jump back to our index HTML file, and we're going to add some on-click events here. So for our favorites navigation selection here, we're going to add in an on-click attribute, and this is going to launch the update DOM function, passing in favorites as the parameter so that it will load the favorites version of the DOM. Then here, when we want to just load more while we're already in our results page, we will add another on-click. This time it will be for our first function, get NASA pictures. And we'll also copy this to our other navigation item. So this down here is the navigation that we want to show when we're actually in the favorites page. This will do the same thing. It will load 10 results from the API. Okay, so we can save everything and check it out. Okay, so we see that we're on our results page. We see we have the add to favorites option here. If we click favorites, we can see that, yeah, we've navigated to our favorites page. You can see we have our remove favorite, and you can see we only have our 2 items that we had in local storage. Awesome. So that's working. But we can see that our navigation has not changed. We're already in the favorites page, so we want this to change to be load more NASA images instead of our 2 options here. We also want to add a loading animation when we first load the page. So if I were to refresh this, we can see that for a second, it's just blank, but we want our loading animation to be there at first and only be removed once everything has loaded. So let's start with the loader. You might remember that in our HTML, we have the hidden CSS class on our loader div. So we want to remove that class when we want to show it. So we're going to go back into our JavaScript, and on our first function, our get NASA pictures function, we want to add in the loader at the very beginning. So we'll comment out a title for this. We want to show the loader. We're going to target our loader constant and the class list, and we're going to use the remove method in order to remove the hidden class. So we can save that now and check it out. Okay, so we can see that we have our loader back. Awesome. If we scroll, you can see our scroll bar here. We can also see that it's fixed position and it's taking up the entire page, so we can't see anything behind it. That is good. That's exactly what we want. But now we need to make another function that's going to remove the loader when everything has finished loading. So to do this, we're going to go back to our code, And at the very top, we're going to create a function called show content. And then inside of this function, we are going to target our loader again, class list, and this time we're going to add back the hidden class. We're going to call this show content function within our update DOM function after we've finished creating our DOM nodes. So at the very bottom here, we will trigger our show content function. So let's save that and check it out. Okay, so when we refresh the page, we see that we have our loader briefly, and then as soon as our content is loaded, our loader is removed. Excellent, so that's working. If we click on Load More, we can see that the same thing happens. Perfect. But let's say that I scrolled down the page, and then I clicked Load More. So you can see that what happens is I stay kind of where I'm at on the page. You can see that this image is cut off, and we have new content above us and below us. This is not exactly how we want it to work. It would be better to always start at the top of the page when we are loading our results, no matter if we've scrolled down the page or not, like I just did. We can accomplish this by using the scroll to method on our window. So this allows us to set a particular set of coordinates in the document. So if we scroll down to an example, we have our x coordinate and our y coordinate, which we could use something simple like this, or we can use options and be able to set things like the behavior. So that's what we actually want to do in this case. So let's go back and add this. So we're going to want to add this to the show content function at the very top here. So we want to do this before we hide our loader, because we want it to scroll behind the scenes. So we will target window.scroll_to, and then within this, we're going to have an object, so we're going to use curly brackets, and the first value will be a top of 0, so we want it to go to the very top of the page, comma, and then we want to set the behavior. So in that example, it had a scroll behavior of smooth, but in this case, I actually wanted to use a scroll behavior of instant, so that it scrolls instantly to the top, and as soon as the loader is removed, we don't see any of the scroll animation. It's already at the top. If we used the smooth behavior, there would be a delay in it still scrolling when the loader is removed. So let's try to save that and check it out. Okay, so let's scroll down the page here and then press Load More, Animation, and we can see we're at the top of the page. All right, perfect. So that's working. The last thing we need to do now is switch our navigation menu so that when we're on the favorites page, we have different nav items here. I would challenge you to pause the video and see if you can figure out how to do this. I'll give you a hint. You'll need to pass a parameter to the show content function. Okay, so let's jump back to the code and implement that. So we're going to need to take a parameter here. The parameter, you might have guessed, is page, the same one we're using everywhere else. We'll need to scroll down into our update DOM function and make sure we are passing that page value into our show content function. Then we can go back up to the top here. And in the middle of our function, we're going to need to set a conditional. So if our page is equal to, again, 3 equal signs, single quotes, results, then we want to have our results nav dot classlist dot remove hidden. So just like we had with our loader, we are using our hidden class on our navigation items here, because this is using display flex, as you might remember. And we'll need to do the opposite here. So for our favorites nav now, we want to add the class list of hidden or make sure that it is there. So if we're on the results page, we want to remove the hidden class from the results nav so that it shows up, and we want to hide the favorites nav. Else, we want to do the opposite. So we can actually copy this, paste it in here, and instead of removing the hidden class, we want to add it for our results nav, and instead of adding the hidden class for our favorites nav, we want to remove it. So we can save that and check it out. Okay, so we're on our results page here. If we click on favorites, we can see, awesome, our navigation has changed to our favorites navigation. You see that we have our 2 items in here still. If we click on this link, we have our loader, and it goes back and loads 10 new results. Awesome, so that's working perfectly. Now, let's just make sure everything else is still working. So we're going to add this to favorites. We see that we have our added bubble here. If we try to add it again, we see that nothing happens. Okay, so that's working. Let's jump back to our favorites now, and we'll scroll to the very bottom, and we're going to delete the last favorite here, and we can see that it's deleted, and it also scrolls back to the top, and now we just have our 2 items in here. Perfect. And lastly, we can see that if we refresh the page and go back to our favorites, that we maintain the 2 favorites that we had kept in local storage. Awesome. So that's pretty much it for our functionality for our project. I hope you had fun working with the NASA API and local storage. I would challenge you, if you're feeling very ambitious, to try to create a project that uses a different NASA API, so not just the astronomy picture of the day. Maybe you can build one using the Mars API, for example. Feel free to send them to me, and we will share them in the course with everybody else. All right, so that's it for the project. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We just finished another awesome project, and how cool is that picture? I think this is my favorite one so far. All right, let's get back to talking about the code. Now, we've done a lot of projects by now, and you may have noticed something. That is, we are doing a lot of what we call imperative programming. Now, in this code review, I want to talk about a programming paradigm that is a way to write code, a way to think about code. And there's 2 types or 2 things that I'm going to talk about that are very different or opposing. One is declarative programming. The other is imperative programming. So what do they mean? Let's first start with imperative programming because this is what we've been doing up until now. You see, imperative programming is a programming paradigm. Again, remember, a paradigm is a way to organize your code, to write your code. And it uses programming statements to tell the computer what to do step by step. So let's think about that. Is that what we've been doing? Is that what imperative programming is? I mean, kind of, right? We've been declaring and grabbing things from our DOM. We've then set some variables, and then we tell it to perform some action. So we want to show content. So we're going to scroll to the top. We're going to add some classes or hide some classes. We're going to display the results. We're going to create DOM nodes. We go step by step. We update the DOM every time the user clicks refresh. We get NASA pictures. Keep going, keep going. And if we want to remove favorites, for example, we update the DOM. This is declarative programming because we are guiding the computer step by step, telling it exactly what to do. If this happens, then delete this and add this to local storage, then update the DOM. Step by step, we're holding the computer's hand and telling it exactly what to do. And this imperative style of programming is how programming really got started, right? The reason we program is to tell computers what to do to be able to help us to display websites, to help us with tasks. But the problem right now is that our programs, our websites are fairly small. These are small projects, but as projects get bigger and bigger, you have to keep more and more things in your head. When do we update the DOM? What happens when we update the DOM? When do we create DOM notes? When do we show content? When do we save favorites, and what happens then? And as our programs get bigger and bigger and bigger, an imperative style of programming makes us have to understand exactly what happens each step of the way. And because we have to tell the program exactly what to do in what order, there's a lot of bugs that can form. Now, this is something that unless you have experience with, unless you've worked with large code bases, it is hard to understand. But trust me on this. This imperative style programming, although very useful, can be bug prone. So what is the alternative? What is the better solution? Well, it's declarative programming. Now, it doesn't mean that declarative programming is better than imperative programming. It's just two paradigms, two ways of writing code. Now, declarative programming expresses logic without describing its control flow. What do I mean by that? With a declarative programming, we tell the computer to say, hey, I want this to happen. And then the computer just knows how to do it. For example, HTML is declarative. That is, we don't need to tell HTML what to display on a page. There's no step-by-step output of do this, do that, then do this, display the head, add the title, add the body. No, it's declarative. Hey, I want my document to look like this. And the computer figures out how to display this information based on some structure that we agree upon, in this case, HTML. So HTML is very declarative. The script.js that we wrote is very imperative. And this is where libraries and frameworks like React, Vue, Angular come into place. Because imperative code becomes harder and harder to what we call reason about or understand and keep track of in our mind, more and more bugs are introduced. And libraries and frameworks like React help us write more declarative programming so that we don't have to worry about these if-else statements. If else, do this, then do that. Then if this happens, do this. It's declarative. For example, with React, this idea of update DOM, we don't need to do it. In React, we simply say, hey, I want this to display on a page, kind of like HTML. And React is going to decide when that update to the DOM needs to happen. When should the render or when should we update the content of the DOM? This is all done in React. Yes, there's still programming. Yes, there's still JavaScript. We still have to give it instructions. But instead of step-by-step logic, React gives us a higher level of abstraction. It takes away some of this complexity so that it does it really, really well. It still does imperative programming underneath the hood. But for us, as programmers, we are able to write declarative code like HTML. And even though we don't know underneath the hood exactly how HTML renders things on a page, we're able to declaratively say what we want to happen, and the rest is taken care of by a computer. So frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue are able to do this declarative style of programming. Not all the time. Obviously, there's still ways to do both in each tool and library, and it depends on how you write. But this idea of a declarative style of programming, where you tell it what you want the output to be, and the computer does it for us, is a nice way for us to avoid bugs in the future. Now, this is a bit of an advanced topic, but it is a good thing to talk about at this point because most people don't understand why we need tools like frameworks and libraries. And this is exactly the reason that we want them. Things like updating DOM should be something that a library does really, really well for us instead of us having to write it one by one. I'm going to include a video from my other React course, which talks about this idea of imperative and declarative programming when it comes to React, so that you can dive in a little bit deeper. But for this code review, start noticing these things that we start doing, these complexities of if this, then that, if this, then that. As more and more complexity enters our code, there's more and more rooms for bugs. So that's when we want to start using libraries and frameworks that allow us to write more declarative code. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Now, the success of React comes down to 4 key things. And these React concepts are what we're going to go over in the next 4 videos. But in this one, let's talk about the first one. And the first one, React says, hey, don't touch the DOM, I'll do it. What do I mean by this? You see, many existing frameworks and libraries before React were directly manipulating this DOM on every page. First, let's just go over what a DOM is. If you remember, DOM is our document object model. It's what the browser uses to display, well, a website or a web app. And JavaScript is simply manipulating this DOM. That's all JavaScript is doing. For example, if I right-click over here and select Inspect, you'll see that here, if I click on Unvote, we'll get a little flash saying that, hey, JavaScript just updated this. If I click again, I get a little flash. The DOM is just the tree representation of the page. We start all the way up from the HTML tag, all the way down to the body through each individual element. And websites were built using things like this. All these ways that browsers allowed us to manipulate the DOM. They gave us the DOM API that we could access using something like inner HTML or get element by ID, get elements by tag name. This API allowed us to traverse the DOM, access any node we wanted to, maybe remove them, add new nodes. And before React, this is what libraries did. You either did this manually, or you used jQuery, or you used some sort of a library that allowed you to use this in a simple fashion. You see, this way of programming was called imperative. That is, in an imperative paradigm, you directly change individual parts of your app in response to various user events. So you had, let's say, your JavaScript file. You'd say, hey, if user is logged in, well, then go change that little icon over here to the user's profile. And now that the user is logged in, well, also show profile page. Okay, so JavaScript goes, changes the DOM, and updates the profile page. And then, okay, now that we're also logged in, we also need to display friends. Okay, let's do that as well. Modify the DOM. And all right, that's good. We're good. Oh, by the way, it's been 5 seconds and we need to display a chat over here. Okay, I'm going to go and do that. Now, this sounds intuitive, but the problem with this imperative approach is that it becomes difficult to see the relationships between events and all these edge cases. Remember this diagram over here where we had AngularJS that all of a sudden had all these relationships affecting each other and all these arrows pointing to different things? Well, instead of this imperative approach, React came up with a novel concept, a more declarative approach. And this is what React says to you. Hey, DOM manipulation is one of the biggest performance bottlenecks. It takes a long time for DOM changes to happen. The browser has to do 2 really intensive operations. One is to repaint, that is, change an element and add it onto a page. And then reflow, which is to recalculate the layout of the page and move things around if need be. So changing the DOM was a really expensive operation. So React says, hey, you know what? Let me take care of that. I'll find the best way for me to change the DOM and just declare to me what your app looks like. So all we need to do is say, hey, this is a JavaScript object of how I want the app to look. And React is going to hold this JavaScript object, this massive blueprint of how things should look. And based on this blueprint that we give it, well, React just says, hey, just tell me what the page should look like, and I'll take care of it. I'll do everything for you. I'll find the best way to use the DOM. You're never going to touch the DOM. Just tell me what the page should look like. This declarative paradigm is called that because we declare that, hey, this is what the state or data of our app should be like. And based on this state, well, then just make those changes. So if user is logged in, then React already knows exactly what to update and what to do. Now, this idea of a declarative style meant that we didn't have to directly say, do this, and if this happens, then do that, where we just say one by one exactly what should happen. Instead, we tell it, this is the state of our app. And React automatically just does it for us. The difference is that all the different states are accounted for in one place. That is one big JavaScript object that describes how our app should look. And this resulted in less complexity, better code quality, and faster developer times. So it created this whole idea of, hey, you can build web interfaces without touching the DOM. And this is where the name React came from. The name React is simply saying, hey, based on whatever the state or data of the app is that describes our app, I'm just going to react to it and change everything for you so that you get the display that you want.